Tensions between the United States and Venezuela have once again become a major topic in global politics, raising questions about whether the long-standing standoff between the two countries could ever turn into a direct military conflict. While there is currently no official war, the relationship between Washington and Caracas has been defined for years by hostility, sanctions, military posturing, and deep ideological disagreement. The roots of the conflict go back decades. Venezuela holds one of the largest oil reserves in the world, making it strategically important to the United States. For much of the 20th century, the two countries maintained a cooperative relationship. That began to change in the late 1990s with the rise of socialist leadership in Venezuela, particularly under President Hugo Chavez. His government openly challenged U.S. influence in Latin America, nationalized industries, and aligned Venezuela with countries seen as rivals to the United States. After Chavez's death, Nicolás Maduro took power and continued similar policies. Over time, Venezuela's economy collapsed due to a combination of mismanagement, falling oil prices, corruption, and international sanctions. Hyperinflation, shortages of food and medicine, and mass unemployment followed. Millions of Venezuelans fled the country, creating one of the largest migration crises in the world. The United States responded by increasing economic and political pressure. Washington imposed sweeping sanctions on Venezuela's oil industry, government officials, and financial system. The goal, according to U.S. leaders, was to force democratic reforms and remove what they described as an illegitimate government. Venezuela, in turn, accused the U.S. of economic warfare and blamed sanctions for much of the country's suffering. Military tension has never fully disappeared. The U.S. has repeatedly stated that all options are on the table when it comes to Venezuela, language that implies potential military action. The U.S. military has conducted naval patrols in the Caribbean, officially to combat drug trafficking, but Venezuela views these moves as intimidation. Joint military exercises with regional allies have further fueled suspicion. Venezuela has responded by strengthening its military ties with countries like Russia, China, and Iran. Russian military aircraft, advisors, and equipment have made appearances in Venezuela, sending a clear signal that the country is not isolated. China has provided financial support and infrastructure investment, while Iran has helped Venezuela bypass sanctions through fuel shipments and trade cooperation. These alliances add a global dimension to what might otherwise be a regional dispute. Despite the aggressive rhetoric, a full-scale war between the United States and Venezuela would be highly unlikely and extremely costly. The U.S. military is vastly more powerful, but an invasion or direct conflict would risk destabilizing the entire region. Venezuela's geography, urban population centers, and potential for prolonged resistance would make military intervention complex and dangerous. There would also be massive humanitarian consequences domestically. The issue remains politically sensitive in the United States. Some politicians argue that stronger action is needed to remove Maduro and restore democracy. Others warn that military involvement would repeat past mistakes and further harm civilians. Public support for another foreign conflict is limited, especially after long wars in the Middle East. In recent years, there have been signs of limited diplomatic engagement. Changes in global energy markets and rising oil prices have forced Washington to reconsider aspects of its Venezuela policy. Talks involving sanctions relief in exchange for political concessions have taken place, though progress has been slow and fragile. Trust between the two governments remains extremely low. From Venezuela's perspective, the threat of U.S. aggression is often used to rally domestic support. The government frames itself as defending national sovereignty against imperialism. State media regularly highlights U.S. military actions abroad as evidence that Venezuela could be next. This narrative helps justify internal crackdowns and the concentration of power internationally. Most countries have urged dialogue rather than confrontation. Latin American nations fear that a war would lead to more refugees and economic instability. The United Nations has repeatedly called for peaceful solutions, humanitarian access, and negotiations between political factions inside Venezuela. In reality, the conflict between the United States and Venezuela is less about tanks and missiles and more about power, ideology, and influence. Sanctions, diplomacy, intelligence operations, and information warfare have replaced traditional combat. The struggle plays out in courtrooms, international forums, energy markets, and public opinion rather than on battlefields. As of today, the likelihood of a direct US-Venezuela war remains low, but the tension is real. Miscalculations, regional instability, or sudden political shifts could change the situation quickly. The future will depend on global energy needs, domestic politics in both countries, and whether diplomacy can succeed where pressure has failed. What happens next will shape not only US-Venezuela relations, but also the balance of power in the Americas. The story is ongoing, and the world continues to watch closely.